Hey guys, welcome back to HRG TV. Now today, we're not doing dumb stuff unless you think it's dumb to lift elements, but we're gonna do a lift kit on an element today, which I consider to be cool stuff. So this is a 2003, and all elements are the same with regard to the lift kit installation from 03 all the way to 2011. Now this particular example has 304,000 miles on it, which is impressive if you ask me. It was sagging pretty bad in the back. Now, I think that was because he has a bunch of stuff in the back, which is going to be typical of an element owner. They're going to have gear, camping stuff, and whatever they're carrying in the back. So I think it is very typical for these to have a little bit of sag in the back. Now, we have put a 1-inch spacer on the back to level it out. So if your element does have sagging in the back, you can do a 1-inch spacer to level it out. In this video today, we're actually going to do a 2-inch lift kit for it. Now this kit will likely lift the back just a little bit more. It does have a shorter spacer in the back due to the suspension geometry being different front to rear. The front being the McPherson strut and the rear is a multi-link. But regardless of that, the front's gonna be a 2-inch spacer, the rear is a 1.5. So basically we're gonna get right into it and we're gonna get this thing lifted and check it out. So let me know in the comments, guys, if you wanna see us take the element out on some trails and see what it can do. I would love to hear from you guys about that because I personally haven't had an element out on the trails. I think it'll definitely be putting the lift kit to the test and also the all-wheel drive system and the clutch that has 300,000 miles on it. And while this thing's here, we're actually going to do the R&D for a 6-inch beast kit, which we already have for the 02 to 06 CRV, which is more or less this car's mechanical twin, other than a few small details. So it should basically work other than just a few changes that we're gonna make so that it will fit element. So with that said, guys, here is the lift kit video. Now, step one of the install is we're going to measure ride height at the top of the fender lip. This is just how I do it. You can measure it wherever you want, just as long as you get a before and after. Now we're at 31 in the front, and the back obviously sits a little lower. 30 1/4. So you know, this thing obviously has a ton of miles on it, and the axles are pretty much shot, as you can see here. The boots on both sides are cracked and leaking. I honestly don't know how old these axles are, but it's got 300,000 miles on it, and I'm sure they're not the original ones, but obviously it's time to replace them. And I think most people that are going to be working on these older vehicles are going to do a lot of things like this while you do the lift kit. It only makes sense while it's apart to do all these things. These are actually just off of Rock Auto, but I did find some that were 100% brand new. These are not remanufactured axles. FVP, whatever that stands for. Verified and proven, I'm sure, is the VP. Put your favorite F word in place of the F. These look to be pretty decent in quality, actually. So let's get these out and take a look real quick. Yeah, so this is a brand new axle. And I'm really excited to see how these perform with the lift kit. Alright, the first thing you're going to do is take off the ABS lines. Now these were already pre-broken for me, so they're easy to take off. Now you're going to take off the actual brake line. It is just one 12mm bolt, super easy. Grab your pliers and take off this cotter key. Now normally there's a castle nut there. I'm not sure why there isn't one on this, but that's okay. It will still stay on there. So pull that cotter pin off very carefully. You're going to reuse that 19mm socket is going to grab that nut off of your tie rod end. The next thing you're going to do is whack that puppy with a hammer ever so carefully. Now I should have put the nut back on. Didn't do that, but I would do that if I were you because it will damage the threads if you miss. Next thing we're going to do is pull the bolts out of the lower shock. 22mm socket on the bolt head and a 19mm on the nut itself. Take those two out, and then you're going to hammer those bolts out. You don't have to hit them too hard, they just slide right out. Just tap them right out, tappity tap tap, no problem, get them out of there. And that is going to get the whole hub and everything loose. Now we are swapping the axle as we do this install, but I'm not going to show that in this video. We're going to do a different video for that. Alright, now one thing that's important, if you're not changing the axle, you definitely don't want the hub to come out too far this way, because what will happen is the inner joint of the axle will actually separate, and it's difficult to get it back together. Now it is possible without replacing the axle. The main thing you want to remember is that you need to get this lined up straight on, like so you'll lift this up, and then you might have to turn just a little bit to get it to slip back into place. So actually I think I'm going to demonstrate that today because we're already replacing these axles, so it's not going to matter if they get messed up. But if you pull this out right here, you'll see the axle is out. That's actually the dust shield. Give me 1 second, I'll bend that back so it doesn't make that noise. Okay, so you can see the axle is out of the inner cup, right? See, it's all messed up. Now, I'm gonna show you how to fix it. All right, so you can see I lifted up the other side to make this go in straight. That's gonna help it line up. And at this point, you just wanna turn it until it fits back in. And once you get it, you'll feel it. There it goes. You see how I did that? So I basically just rotated the brake rotor until this was lined up back on the inside of the boot. Now, obviously this is broken, but you can see that it did go back into place. So just a quick demo on how to fix the axle if it does fall out. Maybe save you some time, save you some trouble. Basically what you don't want to have happen is for this to flop out and the axle to come apart in the first place. So to remedy that, what you want to do is tie this up with something. I usually use like a piece of wire. You can use a bungee cord, just something to secure it while you're working on the car. All right, so you can see I just used this bungee cord right here to secure the hub so that it will prevent that from falling out. We are gonna change this axle anyway, so this is just for demonstration purposes, but basically you get the idea. I just want to keep this still. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is take bolts right here. Honda uses 14mm nuts, but these are aftermarket, so these are actually 15s. So just keep that in mind if you're trying to figure out exactly what sockets you're gonna need. We're just gonna loosen that. I'm just gonna catch the strut while I take it out. There you go. Much easier with a helper. Which gets heavy really fast. But once you get the bolt threaded in, get one of them threaded in, the other ones aren't too difficult. Okay, the strut's mounted back in place. Now we can put everything back together just like it was before. So what you want to do is ever so carefully slide everything back together. If you're doing it the smart way, you put all your hardware in a box so it doesn't roll away, especially if you have a kind of a messy shop like I do here. Stuff is easy to get lost. So I usually try to keep everything in a little bucket container. As you can see, it goes together very easily. There's no reason it shouldn't. If you're struggling right now and you can't get this to line up, it's probably because you don't have the other side apart yet. You have to have both sides taken apart for this to actually be easy to do. So, and it does say that in instructions. So we're gonna install camber bolts on this as well. Now this bolt has an offset little lobe on there, sort of like a camshaft, that allows this to move in and out when you turn it. And that gives you your camber adjustment. Yeah, unfortunately I'm having to use my air impact. My cordless impact got stolen out of my wheelbarrow at the pull apart. So lucky I still have this guy. And I'll tell you, it sometimes can be difficult to get these to slide in right here. I mean, this one went right in. So what I've done is I've put the bottom bolt in already. Camber bolt typically goes in the top hole. So one thing that's important to know about these camber bolts is that the nut has what's called a self-locking feature, and the top of the nut is actually crimped in just a little bit to give the nut a good grip on the bolt so that it doesn't just back off and fall out on you. So the problem there is that you can't thread it on all the way by hand. And I've had a lot of people return these saying that they thought the nut was stripped out, when in reality it's just got this self-locking feature. that grips the bolt really tight, and then when you tighten it, it's just on there, right? So that's why they don't just thread on by hand. They're not stripped out, they're not cross-threaded. You just have to know that. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and get this. There it goes. Now see how the washer sort of flushed in right there? That just holds the bolt in place properly. And then we will put the nut on right there. Hold this in place. It's a 19 millimeter. No, it's not. It's an 18 millimeter on the bolt head side. And on this side, it's a 21 millimeter. I'm gonna turn the camber bolt, and I want you to watch the top of this hub when I do so. You see how it moves? That's the cam on the bolt moving this whole assembly back and forth, right? So now you've got your camber adjuster. And that's just enough. That's just enough. It's not a lot, but it's just enough to get this dialed in for your camber. When you take your car to get an alignment done, make sure you tell your alignment guy that you have these camber bolts, because I've had a few people get their car aligned and the camber was the same before and after, and they complained to me about the camber not being adjusted properly. But what happened is that the alignment tech just didn't know that they had these, so they didn't think you could adjust camber, because from the factory you can't. It just comes with these regular bolts and there's no adjustment for camber. That's what these bolts do, is give you that adjustability. So if you didn't know they were there, you wouldn't even try to adjust camber. So you have to make sure that you tell your alignment technician that you have camber adjusters in there. These little brake line things are broken before I started working on it. What you would probably want to do is just zip tie it right there. All right, last thing we're going to do is put the tie rod end on like so. Just make sure that it is seated properly. Fucking air hose is so annoying. This is supposed to have a castle nut on it, but this one does not have one. So I'm just gonna leave it as it is, because I think at some point these towel rod ends are definitely gonna need to be replaced soon. And when that happens, we'll put a castle nut on there. For now, we're gonna just put it back together like it was. Just bend your cotter pin back like that so it doesn't come out. Good to go. Brake lines are on. Just double check everything, make sure you're tight. The only thing we still have to do now is put the axle nut on. So we got a freshy axle nut right there. These are 36 millimeter, not that 32 like the older ones. And make sure those are good and tight. Now, the last thing we're going to do is tighten up all the bolts. I've also had people ask where to set these camber bolts when they're doing the assembly. And to that, I'd say you really don't know until you get it on the alignment rack where you're supposed to set them. By and large, you're going to have positive camber after a lift, so you might want to set them towards negative if you're just eyeballing it or guessing. So I would put them toward the top of the wood, towards the inside. And then when your alignment tech gets a hold of it, he'll dial it in just perfect. But a little tip on that. But I think we're good. Everything's tight. I think the ball joints are actually pretty good on this thing. He did say he had redone the suspension recently. I mean, these are usually torn pretty bad. They're a little cracked, but they're not torn, so that's a good sign. The springs, he said he had just replaced a year ago, and they still do look, you know, pretty fresh. This usually is cracked, and it's not, so it seems like they're in pretty good shape. 304,000 on this bad boy, and I mean another 100 to go easily. So we're gonna go ahead and do the other side, and then drop it down and see what we got. I lost the footage for the rear installation, so what you're about to watch is the second time doing this job, but we do it just for you guys. All right, so for the 1.5 inch spacer, it basically slides onto the strut like so. You've got an M10 by 25 bolt that goes through to the top, and then you have an M10 nut that attaches the spacer to the strut itself. So you're gonna put that on like this and tighten that down just like this. Now I will say, one thing that bugs me, and if you're very particular, it'll probably bug you as well, is you can't really get a lot of leverage on that nut. You're basically just holding it with your hand. Get a 3/8 extension and put that in the hole here, and then it holds the strut in place so that you can really get a lot of leverage on these nuts, like so. And then same thing for the other side. Just turn it over, put your extension in like that, and then you can really crank these down nice and tight. So it goes back in reverse order, basically. I know that is oversimplified, but that's really all you gotta do. Just goes right back in place where it was before. Trick with these element struts is they have this huge protrusion right here, so you can't put them in bottom first, you have to put them in top first. So you gotta go in like that, which is a little bit more challenging, I think, but nevertheless it goes in. Now what I'm gonna suggest you do is get a helper if you can. I don't have a helper, so I'm kind of just holding it in place. All right, so I want to get them lined up with the holes, which I can just do. I'm just gonna go by feel. I can feel where it goes in, and then there you go. See how that just went right in? If you're doing this by yourself like I am, it's a little bit more challenging, but it can be done. So again, we're gonna line this up with the holes and then wedge it in place. See how I've got that held in there? Very, very rigged, but that's all right. On the inside, you can see the bolts are poking through just a little bit. All you have to really do is get the nuts started. It's easier said than done, but you can do it. I got one of them started. Now watch this. This side is not gonna thread, or is it? We've got the other side too, look at that. Run them in. There you go. And the cover was already off, but if you were doing this, you would just go ahead and put the cover back on at this stage. Now all we have to do is line it back up. What you're gonna do is push this back in to its little home right there. See that? You might have to get out a pry bar or two. Basically, you just have to kind of leverage it into place. Okay, so we got to go up a little with the jack. There we go. It's been substantially more difficult than the last time I did this. Everything's crooked now, and I'm not sure what I did differently because the last time it just went right in. But I'm just gonna show you guys the good with the bad here. You can see the bolt doesn't really line up right there, so what we're gonna do is turn this just a little bit with a pair of vice grips. Actually, these are channel locks. And that's gonna get us the alignment that we need for the bolt, which, oh, there it goes, look at that. It was just the shock was twisted a little bit. No wonder it was so difficult. Now, normally there'd be a nut right here, but it was already broken off when I started working on it. So yours will have a nut that's welded in. Makes it a lot easier to run the bolt in. You basically just get it lined up like this and then tighten it from this side, and it'll just find its way into the threads there. Makes it much easier to have the nut on there. We don't have that, so we're just gonna use what we got, which is just basically what's left over of a nut to go right there. All right, now that we've got the strut mounted back in, we have to reconnect everything. All right, I have to admit that I made a mistake here. One of the things that you're supposed to do in this install, and I got so wrapped up in trying to get that spacer to fit, I completely forgot to install the Camber Adjuster. So it's a lot easier to install this when the strut is completely out of the car, because it's very difficult to reach this bolt right here when the strut is in the way. I wonder if I can get to it with a ratcheting wrench. Maybe I can. If you haven't had this apart yet, this is going to be very difficult to get loose. You just use a socket, no big deal. But I'm going to use a ratcheting wrench because I've already gotten that bolt loose. Now, if you'll notice on these upper control arms, there's a couple of little holes here. That is actually for the ABS lines, which I also didn't show you how to take apart, but basically they clip into the arm like that. The adjustable arms come with this little bracket right here that allows you to clip your ABS lines into the arm. But as you can see here, this is backwards. So what you're going to have to do is flip this bracket around the other way so that it sticks out right here. And when you install it, then you can clip these back in. This is a 10mm bolt right here. So we're going to go ahead and take these out, turn this bracket around the other way, and we can mount this in the car. Now, when you put this in, you'll see that this will now clip in like it's supposed to. So let's go ahead and put this back together. Another question I get is, how do I adjust these? Well, this here in the middle, basically it's like a turnbuckle, and when you turn it a certain way, it lengthens or shortens this arm. So as you can see, these are more or less set the same as the OEM. So as a default place to start, you can put those in the OEM position. We want these to be about the same length. So I'm going to shorten this up just a little bit. I want you to see how this works. Got these two loosened here, these two stop nuts, and then you just turn this like this basically, and then you would retighten these stop nuts. Now let's see how close we are. It's a little too short now. Let's lengthen it back up just a little bit. Okay, I think that's close enough. This will all get worked out when we get an alignment done, but anyway, let's go ahead and put this back in. Now, as you can see, nothing lines up, but we're about to change that. All you have to do is lift the suspension back up into its former place, and everything will line back up like it's supposed to. Line up our sway bar link right there, and we'll go ahead and tighten that up. Nope, that ain't it. Aftermarket sway bar end link. Got a 16mm nut. Be the only one on this car. Now, I guess we're gonna have to grab a hold of that so that we can tighten it up. Now, to do this right, you maybe would want to grab this side with a wrench and then tighten it by hand, but I didn't do it that way. All right, so there's your sway bar end link. It is not attached on the other side, so it still looks a little bit loose, but that's all right. We will go tighten the other side in just a minute. Next thing is gonna be mounting the hub back to the upper control arm. So what we're gonna do is lift up a little bit more. There we go. So now, is this the one? I think so. That is a significant amount of resistance there. Basically just push that in, and then you can get the bolt in place. All right, and it comes with this nut right here. So basically you're gonna want to just push this in, get the bolt to go through like that. Then you can put the nut on here like this, and then we're gonna tighten it up with this 17mm wrench. Okay, Now we've got to deal with our ABS lines right here like this. Now these were already broken before I started working on it, but it still has a little bit of clippage left. And then you're gonna wanna tighten these stop nuts. Now again, as I've said before, you wanna make sure you tell your alignment technician that you have these. An alignment tech might just do like a toe setting and then say that your camber can't be aligned. I've had that happen before where people did not tell their alignment technician that these were on there. All right, we're back. I don't know what happened. We're filming with GoPros and they're not very reliable. I'm just gonna say that. This is your rear upper control arm, and you have to make sure that this little tab right here is facing down so that the ABS lines will clip back in properly. The last thing you're gonna do is you're gonna want to tighten up these stop nuts so that it doesn't come loose, so that you can make the journey to your alignment shop after you get these installed. All right, the last thing we're gonna do is install the brake line extension brackets. Basically, it comes with a bolt and a nut that you will then connect to the existing brake line like this. Basically, you'll put the factory bolt back in right here. These were apart before I started working on it, so the bolt is actually missing. So I'm gonna just throw in a new bolt. All right, I want to go over something that is specific to the Element, and that's the rear tire is very, very tight against this part of the inner fender right here. This sticks out pretty far, and even from the factory, you can barely put a fingertip between this and the tire. And when you go with a wider tire, especially if you're on factory wheels, it is going to rub right there. So what you want to do is install, at the very least, a set of wheel spacers. These are called hub-centric wheel spacers. Basically, found these on eBay. By the time this video is out, hopefully HRG Offroad will have these for sale on the website. So check that out, hrgoffroad.com. And this gives it just enough room so that the tire does not come in contact with this when the suspension is at full extension like this. If you put wider tires on an Element, especially with the lift kit, you have to put wheel spacers on or go with a low offset wheel. I recommend a 15x8 zero offset or a 16x8 zero offset wheel. So that is the tire and wheel recommendation that I would use on the Element. So that's pretty much it for the installation. Now I want to point out one thing right now. The car is sitting really high, and I don't want you to freak out. You just got done doing an install and it's sitting really high like this. One thing you've got to remember is that the suspension has to settle just a little bit. It's not going to sit like this permanently. But yeah, basically I'm going to steer the wheels, and I want you to see how much it drops when I do that. All right, did you see it drop? It dropped at least an inch or so, and once we drive it around, it'll drop even more. All right, this is the 2-inch kit. This is the after measurement. It does sit a little bit higher in the back. We're at 33. Give it about 33 1/4 in the front. We're at about 33 3/4. So it's a 1/2 inch higher in the back with this kit. But let's just say you want to carry a bunch of gear. You have an Element, you're going to carry stuff in the back. I mean, you got to have that extra capacity, because that's what these cars are for. You're going to have your camping gear, you're going to have your buddies, you might have kids. It's to your benefit to have a little bit more lift in the back, just so you can carry stuff and it doesn't sag, right? So to me, it makes sense to have a little bit more height in the back. If you're super duper adamant about it being perfectly level, you can do a set of front shims. We do sell those on hrgoffroad.com. They're a 1/4 inch shim, and that'll get you perfectly level. But also there's one other caveat to this. Results may vary because of the fact that there are so many different kinds of aftermarket suspension out there. We've seen lift heights differ a full inch from brand A to brand B. We talked about this on one of our earlier videos on the 1st gen CRV. So keep that in mind. All right, one more test. Question on everyone's mind. Does it have, there's a mosquito. Oh, did I get him? Nope. Oh, what the fuck is wrong with this thing? 300,000 miles, the seatbelt doesn't work anymore. One more question on everyone's mind. Does it shake when you accelerate? Actually, the AC doesn't even work, so I'm gonna turn that off. Got lights, yes. We are out of gas and out of battery. Battery was completely dead when I started it up with the jump box. So I don't wanna stall it. I haven't driven manual in a while. Okay, so we're gonna, now this hasn't been aligned or anything. We're just right out of the shop, right out of the gate. We're gonna see if it has any kind of wobbling or shakiness. Now the tires on this car are actually the original tires from the War Wagon from 2015. I think they're, yeah, about 7 years old. So the tires aren't that great. They're noisy, but hopefully we'll get a good idea. So far so good. It feels nice and smooth. Ooh, barking the tires. Cops are gonna come get me. I will say this thing is a little bit sketchy to drive with it being lifted and not aligned. Now, typically when you lift, the front wheels are gonna wanna do this and the back wheels are gonna wanna do this. And it makes for some spooky handling characteristics. So if you have that issue, go get it aligned, it'll fix that. All right, the GoPro went dead right before I could do anything. Now I see why a lot of people are switching to iPhones to record and not GoPros, because man, those things are unreliable. The iPhone just always works. So here we go. We're gonna do an acceleration test on this road right here. This is a closed street in Mexico. But basically, I'm gonna just give it some throttle, and bear with me because this is gonna be a little bit challenging to do while I hold the phone. Here we go. Now you can see the steering wheel, little barkage of the tires. Now as you can see, the steering wheel is crooked because it hasn't been aligned, but that'll fix when we get an alignment done. But full throttle again, seems to be doing just fine. So FVP axles for the win, HRG 2-inch lift kit. All right, that's pretty much it for this video. I appreciate you guys watching to the end. And if you are looking for a lift kit for your Element or CRV or Ridgeline or Pilot or any other Honda SUV / crossover, we do have them at HRGoffroad.com. Go check it out. We have a lot of awesome stuff. There's going to be a lot more stuff coming for Element too, so keep your eyes on the website for that. And if that said, I appreciate you guys watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you in the next video. Smells like fucking taint sweat in here. Fucking beat, dude. Fucking beat. Oh, it's not even jacked up high enough, you dumb cock. I gotta jack it up more.